Most people can't scale infinitely, but they can scale a lot further than you think. And that what I've learned over the years is that the key to scaling is about being obsessed with mastering the craft of your job.
Welcome everyone to WorkPod. Today we have with us Matt Blumberg and CEO and founder of Bolster. And friends, listeners and viewers, so I think very few times we get guest, or we got the opportunity to talk to the guest who have built the whole thing from ground up for themselves, as well as they're assisting a lot of other companies from this in their startup journey. And Matt is one such leader that we have on board, and we'll have a ball. We'll talk about the startups, we'll talk about the leadership, the landscape, and his book, Startup CXO. So with that, Matt, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Vishal. Good to be here.
Awesome. So as a start, why don't you walk us through your journey? What brought you to this world till today?
So I've been working in the commercial internet basically since 1994, which is pretty early on in the grand scheme of things. I started actually working as an associate at a venture capital firm doing investing in some of the very early internet companies. It was a software investment firm. And then I spent 5 years as the general manager of an internet business called Moviephone.com, which was inside of an interactive services company, a small cap public company called Moviephone that had been doing interactive telephone work in the 80s and early 90s. So I built and was kind of running a top website at the very early days of the internet. We sold Moviephone to AOL in 1999 when AOL was kind of the Google of its day. And I started a company called ReturnPath, which was in the email marketing space. And with the help of a great team and some fantastic investors, scaled that business over the course of 20 years to be north of 100 million in revenue and profitable. We sold that company in 2019. Along the way, I had done a lot of mentoring of other startups. I write a blog, which is called startupceo.com. I wrote a book called Startup CEO. And a lot of members of my senior team from ReturnPath and I wanted to start another business together. And we started Bolster in 2020, right at the beginning of the pandemic. So we're now running and scaling a brand new startup that is in the business of helping other startups figure out how to scale their leadership teams and scale their boards, and helping startup CEOs figure out how to scale themselves with mentoring and coaching. It's a really innovative business model. It's an executive talent marketplace that's aimed at startups. So that is what we're doing with Bolster.
So before we jump into the conversation, so tell us the backstory behind Bolster. So what brought up this need for you to start this venture?
So there were a few things that kind of came together at the same time. My team and I really wanted to do something that was impactful for the startup ecosystem. And that's an ecosystem we've lived in for 2 decades, we're very familiar with. I personally had done a lot of mentoring and coaching and advising of early stage CEOs. I've sat on a bunch of boards, as well as scaling my own business. And we looked at some of the trends that were going on in the workforce. And one of the most important ones over the last few years, pre-pandemic, although I think the pandemic kind of accelerated it, was this trend of the gig economy making its way up to the executive suite. And more executives now want to work part-time and piecemeal and project work, sometimes permanently, sometimes when they're between jobs. Now it's easier than ever to work remotely and work on Zoom. It occurred to us that the traditional way that companies find executive talent or board talent as startups and early stage companies is kind of incompatible with the way startups operate. So if you think about it, if you're a startup CEO and you need help, you need a CFO, or you need an interim head of marketing, or you need a part-time head of people, what do? You do one of two things. You either email your board, email your VC, right? Hey, who do you know that can do something? Or you pay a huge amount of money and take months and months and months to go through a traditional search process, whether you use a search firm or an agency, or even try to do it on your own in-house. And all of those things are, they can get you people, but they're not necessarily lending themselves to finding the best people, to finding a diverse pipeline of talent, or sort of a comprehensive process. And they take a long time. They're very inflexible and heavy for startups. So look, at the end of the day, startups need three things to be successful. They need a great idea and product market fit. They need money, and they need a great team. And in particular, they need a great leadership team, and they need a great board if they're going to scale. And all of these things kind of came together and convinced us that this was a space that we wanted to work on. And that's why we created Bolster.
I think fascinating. So let's spend a few minutes on your journey assisting startups. And you have been involved with a lot of startups. You have been assisting a lot of startups and helping them structure. So in your journey, what are some of the things that you have seen successful, or some of the tenets of a successful startup, or some of the qualities that you look for in a startup when it comes to predicting their success?
I think it starts with two things: the problem space and the strength of the team. And money is important, but obviously, if you get those first two things right, money finds its way into the business. And the most successful startups are the ones that have that really strong vision. What is the real pain that real people or real companies have that you're going to go solve, and how are you going to solve it? And how are you going to solve it in a way that is better, faster, and cheaper than other solutions out there, or completely unique, or whatever the model is. I think the strength of team has a lot to do with vision, but it also has to do with the capacity to think strategically and with the capacity to execute. And at the end of the day, you can have a great idea, but if you can't execute it, then it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter how much money you have. So, when I see those two things come together in a startup, I get excited about that startup's prospects.
Interesting. And so if we talk about, say, team, and I think you wrote extensively about team. You are assisting many startups and understanding the leadership and the importance of leadership. So if suppose we say hypothetically we see a startup's incubation journey from day zero to, say, IPO, from your vantage point, at which stage in a startup, which kind of leadership is essential for its success? Like, did you get a chance to think about how, say, if I'm an entrepreneur getting into my startup journey, at what point I should be looking for which kind of talent pool? I wonder if you have any perspective on
that. I do. I mean, I think there are people you can bring into a business who are great at a particular stage, but aren't great at other stages. And then there are people in businesses in the startup world who are very good at scaling from one stage to the next. And you can learn the second one, but that doesn't necessarily come naturally to everyone. So the most important thing startup CEOs can do is just understand the people on their team and how scalable they are to the next stage of the company's life. Whether you're going from seed to Series A, or Series A to Series B, or B to C, just because you nailed one doesn't mean you're ready to nail the next, because different things are required. And it's not just different things are required to be successful at, a Series B company versus a Series A company. It's navigating that transition from one stage to the other that not everyone is great at. And I think the reason not everyone's great at it is that usually startups are a journey in creative destruction. And the things that make a company work at one stage actually have to frequently be torn down or at least altered pretty dramatically for the company to be successful at the next stage of life. So whether it's, you implement your first version of an accounting system and it's QuickBooks, and then it's just not going to work and you have to go implement Intact, but that actually means you have to rip out a system, put in a new one, reinvent accounting processes around it. And that part, the stage transition part, and you can apply that to any functional department. You can apply it to systems or processes or people. It's that tear down and build back part that's really difficult for a lot of people, because a lot of those people are the ones that built it in the first place. So being good, not just at creative destruction as in, hey, I'm going to come in and we're going to do things differently and I'm going to level it up, but being the person who built it and then had to replace it is what's really challenging.
Interesting. So I think one thing that's fascinating about your journey. So in your past life, you have led an innovative part or team of a successful organization, Moviefone, bring it to success. You yourself have hand created an organization, bring it to success, and many times success, as you rightly said, is good team and great execution. So now, in your journey, and when we talked to a bunch of leaders about, and they said, hey, culture is center to both of them, right? Hopefully, inviting or having ability to see great talent, and understanding the execution element. So, from your journey and from the journey that you have seen successful startups undertake, what are some of the good practices you have seen that entrepreneurs or companies do building a successful culture?
The most important thing about building a successful culture is being intentional about it. So as I always say, every company has a culture, whether or not the founder's paying attention to it, right? It just develops. It is. And if you want to shape the culture, then you have to shape the culture. You have to spend time doing that. And not all founders do that. There are a lot of founders that just, think, oh, well, I'm going to set the tone and it's going to be fine, or they don't even think about it. And it's easy to wake up one day with 20, 30, 50 people in the company and actually not like what you see, even though you're the founder, even though you're the CEO. So being really intentional about shaping the culture, about putting the programs in place, the practices, the cultural artifacts, weaving culture into the employee life cycle, from how you interview people to how you review people and compensate people and hire them, fire them. All those things are really important. But if you're not being intentional about them, they won't happen the right way. So that's the most important thing, is just paying attention to it and being intentional about it.
And if we talk about, say, pitfalls or some of the struggles, so when you see such startups which you really find them promising and they're showing some good progress, what are some of the pitfalls that you see that startup or the entrepreneurs leading it find themselves in, that you say these are some of the quick fixes, if you somehow mend it, you'll be in a lot better shape than you are today?
I think there are three, and I'll give you one in each of the three areas, right? Product market fit, money, and talent. With product market fit, I think the biggest pitfall is that you can go through the lean canvas or whatever your methodology is around doing customer discovery and think you have the answer, but in fact, the answer is only really going to work for 10 people. So selection bias in the process of doing customer discovery is a pitfall. Just because 10 people will buy it doesn't mean 1,000 people will buy it. Just because 10 companies think it's interesting doesn't mean 1,000 will. And being able to figure that out, are you talking to a wide enough sample of companies, big ones and small ones, conservative ones and progressive ones, and I don't mean that politically, but early adopters and late adopters, et cetera. So I think that sort of pitfall is like, hey, I did discovery, 10 customers are in, I'm good. Is the pitfall around product market fit. The pitfall around money is, especially today, I think it's very easy to overcapitalize a business and overspend in the name of speed. And, that just leads companies to do dumb things and get out over their skis and before they're ready. It just causes infinite problems down the road. Too much money in and too much money out. And then I think the biggest pitfall when it comes to talent, when it comes to leadership talent, the biggest pitfall is not moving people out quickly enough if they're the wrong fit. It's really hard to replace an executive. I know that. Everybody knows that. But figuring out how to bite that bullet when someone isn't like they're doing an okay job, but not a great job. They're doing a great job, but they're a bad cultural fit. Those are tough decisions. And one of my mentors once said to me, in hindsight, you never fire someone too soon. You only fire them too late. So I think that's a real pitfall. And if I can give you a fourth one, although it's about talent as well, I think most founders don't pay enough attention to building their board and really being thoughtful about constructing a high quality and diverse and independent board early enough in the company's life. And that just leads over time to you having a board that is piled up with founders and VCs and is not the strategic asset that you need.
That's a fair point. So if we let's spend a few minutes on the leadership aspect of this. So from your vantage point, what are the tenets of a successful leader? Like, what are some of the qualities that you really aspire or see great leaders carry?
So I think great leaders, first and foremost, are authentic. They're themselves. That doesn't necessarily mean transparent. I'm a big fan of transparency, but I know plenty of good leaders that are not super transparent. So you can debate that one. But authenticity is really important. And what that means is if you say one thing to one person, you got to say that same thing to the next person. You can't be saying different things to different people. You can't be at odds with yourself. You also can't be at odds with the culture and with the policies that you create for the business. And I mean, I've seen founders over the years that break their own policies all the time and sort of feel like, oh, I'm the founder, I can do whatever I want. That's not a good practice of leadership as well. So I think there's sort of an authenticity of leadership that's important. I think the other thing that I've always found is that getting to know people, the people in your company, getting to know them as people is really important. They may not be your best friends, right? They may be your professional colleagues, but especially anyone that you work with regularly, you should know the name of their spouse, boyfriend, girlfriend, partner. You should know the names and ages of their kids. You should know what makes them tick as humans, what they care about. And that, I think, makes you a better leader as well. And I can probably come up with 10 other things, but...
So that's fair. So when you hire a leader in your personal journey, so what are some of the tenets that you look for? So very early in the conversation, we are bringing someone on board. What is your litmus test to, in a snapshot judgment, figure out if someone is going to be a good leadership add-on to your organization?
There are a few things that I always look for. One is I always look for someone who has a positive outlook. Now, that doesn't mean someone who is blindly optimistic, right? I appreciate people who are realistic quite a bit. But I want people who have a positive outlook on life, who believe that they can work hard and produce good results, who believe in their team, who believe in the idea, who believe that tomorrow is going to be a better day than today. So I think positivity is a really important thing. I certainly look for people who are, in fact, authentic and who are who they say they are. And sometimes it's a little hard to get out of an interview process, but you can get it if you push enough on it. And for me, I always try to find people who are not political. And again, different organizations and different cultures function differently. There are organizations where actually you must be political in order to survive and thrive in them. But the companies that I've run over the years, we try to really stay away from silos and from politics. And being able to identify that, sort of have the spidey sense to figure that out in an interview process or by checking references is pretty important. And I remember so clearly this one executive who I parted ways with years and years ago, different business, who was not effective at getting things done at the company, and everybody knew it. And when I fired him, he said, "You know what the problem with your company is? The problem is I could never figure out whose ass I had to kiss to get anything done around this place." And I said, that is the problem. The problem is there was no one's ass to kiss. The problem is you actually just had to do the work. And this person had just spent so much time trying to figure out how to work the system as opposed to just like being a good citizen and doing the work. So politics is something that that I always try to sort of smoke out early on. And then finally with leaders, the last thing I would say is, do they have followers? Most of the great leaders that I've hired and worked with over the years come, and the first thing they say is like, "Hey, I've got 5 people that want to come work with me again." And they're great people. And being able to have and cultivate that sort of followership over time is the hallmark of a great leader.
And in your journey, so you have managed team of again large organization. You have managed team of a successful startup, and now you're again back in the startup mode, executing and building a team. So how are these teams or the expectations are different when it comes to these 3 organizational templates? When it comes to corporate, when it comes to your current startups or basically mid scale or mid to large scale?
The early stage is just all about getting things done, right? And it's getting done as much as you can get done, as quickly as you can get it done. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be the most efficient. You just have to get a lot of things done. And what that means is that you're building an organization full of people who are at the same time individual contributors and managers and leaders. You need people to be able to swarm on projects and get things done. And as the organization grows, you start to need people who are, a little more specialized, who appreciate some boundaries in the organization, who are better at handoffs. As organizations scale, you have to go through what we talked about a little bit earlier, sort of this cycle of creative destruction, of tear things down and build things back up. And then as organizations get bigger and bigger, people have to be good at building the machine. And whether that's the talent machine, so making sure that each organization is great at bringing in entry-level talent and training them up and getting them ready for the next level and the next level. The next level, they have to be good at managing sort of cross-functional teams, being really disciplined about goals. So they're just different flavors and characters to organizations at different stage of life. And like I said, there's some people that are great at all stages as well as the transitions across them, and there's some people that are just great, in an individual stage.
And so if we talk about that's a great point. So if we talk about grooming leaders within an organization, like what are some of your tips or tricks that has worked for you when it comes to building your own team members to be successful leaders of tomorrow?
So we had a really successful model at Return Path that we didn't get to right away. It took us years to get there. And that model was hiring in really talented managers and senior individual contributors and kind of director level people from the outside, and sort of grooming them or training them on how to manage and lead in our culture and in our environment, and supplied them with good leaders on the inside, with good coaches, with good mentors. But we had much more success with that model than we did the model of hiring in really, really senior people from the outside who kind of already had their way of doing things and weren't always interested in doing things, slightly differently. But that model of sort of bring them in the middle and raise them up, with a lot of coaching and mentoring and support and feedback, was really productive for us. And at the end at Return Path, I think of the top 15 people in the company, other than the founders, I think every single one of them was either brought in the middle, or even as an individual contributor earlier on and kind of groomed up.
Fascinating. So now let's spend a few minutes on your book, and definitely it's a pretty handsful. I think it's a lot of insights, a great field guide, by the way. And I'm curious, why write this book?
Yeah, and it's very heavy. Also, if you have a hard copy of it, it's very long. It's not actually meant to be read front to back necessarily. So, my first book, Startup CEO, which came out in 2013, and then we did a second edition in 2020. That book was designed to be a kind of like an instruction manual for a first-time CEO. So it is also not designed to read front to back, but has 65 or 70 chapters of how to do things, and it's designed for a CEO to have it on their desk and just open it when they need help with something. How to hire executives, how to build a board, how to run a board meeting, how to work with an executive assistant, how to write a pitch deck. Right? It's really discrete, 4, 5, 6 page chapters of like, all right, here's some thoughts. Great, let me go from there. And the thing that the book was kind of lacking, that I thought about after I wrote it and got some feedback on from other people, was, hey, the most important thing sometimes of being a CEO is managing the people on your executive team and orchestrating an executive team. And I don't really know how. I mean, so I heard this from CEOs. I don't really know how to manage a head of sales. I've never done sales before, right? I'm a technical founder. Or, gosh, our organization's gotten really big. I don't really know how to manage a CFO at this scale. I don't know what's important. And so that was sort of the origin of Startup CXO. And what we did with Startup CXO is I got people together who have been long tenured heads of all the different major functions in a company: sales, marketing, HR, finance, customer success, partnerships, product, technology. And I might have forgotten one, but I got them together and I said, let's write a book that's an instruction manual for a whole executive team. So that's really what Startup CXO is. Each section, which was written by a different executive with some pieces of it written by me, is about how to do that job. So if you are a first-time CFO, how do you do that job, right? You've been in the finance department, maybe you were VP of finance or controller somewhere, but you've never been a CFO. What are the 25 things you need to master to be a great CFO? The next section is about the HR function. What are the 25 things you need to master to be head of HR, et cetera? It goes through all the functions that way. So the book really has 3 uses. One is for a CEO who wants to understand, like, all right, what does a great CFO do? Like, what am I supposed to manage with this person that I've never done that job before, right? What do I need to care about? I need to care about cash management and treasury. I need to care about equity management. Like, how do I even know what they're supposed to be doing? The second use case is for executives or for an executive team to not just understand their own function. Hopefully, if someone's a first-time executive, the chapter about their function is going to be really useful. But even experienced executives, it's the chapters about the other functions that are really helpful, right? If you're running sales and your 2 principal executive partners are marketing and customer success, or include finance in that or partnerships, like, you should probably understand what those people are doing, and what makes them successful at their function. And so the book does that well, obviously, if you read, their section and next to your section. And then finally, I think I hope it's useful for people early in their career who have aspirations to grow into a C-level executive to understand what their career roadmap should look like. So if you're the junior, field marketing person in a marketing department and you want to be a CMO someday, read the 20 chapters about what a startup CMO does. And at least then start to understand, okay, well, I'm doing field marketing today, but I really need some exposure to brand and digital. And gosh, if I don't understand anything about marketing operations and how to build a marketing budget or marketing plan, I'm not going to be a good CMO someday. So hopefully it's useful kind of up and down the stack for some different purposes.
I think so. So when I was reading it, I think one thing that I observed was I felt it's written for CEO. Like so when it just become pretty natural, because it's making you aware, okay, you have a CFO. Does the CFO, is he functioning like this? This is the expectation that you expect from him? And I think you rightly pointed out to the third bucket that you're saying that anyone who wants to get into this will sort of get a understanding of a particular function, of how that function leaders needs to be prepped and prepared for. So that's a pretty huge task. So when you write such field manuals, I wonder what kind of homework you do when it say, okay, because it's, I think I was amazed with how much you have put in, and yet I was amazed at how much could be put in. So and I was, it's pretty fascinating. So want to hear your perspective.
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing is I probably could not have written this book on my own, even given enough time and resources, right? Because I'm not a CFO, I'm not a head of HR. So this book was really a collaborative effort with like 9 or 10 of us, and it's the only way we could have gotten it done. And I would say, look, you could probably write a 200, 300 page book about how to be a CFO. You probably write a 1,000 page book about how to be a CFO. So it's not designed to be everything about everything for everyone, but it's designed to be enough. Again, you come back to startups and what startups need, what startup leadership needs. They need enough. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't need to be comprehensive, but you need enough to know, if you're a first-time founder, like what your CFO is supposed to be doing. So I think each of the functional sections has 20 or so chapters about the most important things to worry about in that function. It doesn't mean there aren't others. And there are plenty of examples of that during the book. But we tried to make it sort of, again, comprehensive enough and useful enough.
So yeah, so I had a ball. I think so. I'm now actually curious to read Startup CEO, because when I was reading this, I find it pretty useful when it comes to what I have, what I need, what I expect. As an entrepreneur, this is a fascinating read from just the mindset perspective, what to expect from which kind of leader pool. So, and as you rightly pointed out, so there are sections, and each section there has a writer talking about, say, chief people officer or CFO or CMO. I'm curious, how did you pick who is the right representation to write about that section for this book?
Well, that was easy for me. I picked the people that I've worked with. So the writer for each section was on the senior executive team at ReturnPath for multiple years. Many of them are also my co-founders at Bolster, although not all of them. But the book is not really meant to be the story of ReturnPath or the story of Bolster. So each one of these people has been a C-level executive running that function for many years at multiple companies at multiple sizes and stages. And that's really what I was looking for. So there is kind of a common storyline, because all of these people did work together for a few years, but all of them, those are a few years out of a career that spans 30 years, where they've got lots of different stories. So, the answer is there's no perfect person to write how to be a chief financial officer. But I know that Jack Sinclair, who wrote that section, knows what he's doing, right? I know he's done it for a long time. I've seen him do it for a long time. He's been incredibly successful at it. He's very collaborative. He's done it at other places, and he's had lots of good mentors in his career. And that was kind of the fun thing for me when I actually started reading people's work. Even though I knew them and had worked with them, I don't know their whole career. I haven't worked with them every minute of their career. And one of my favorite parts, I started reading the HR section that was written by Kathy Hawley, who was my chief people officer at ReturnPath and one of my co-founders at Bolster. And she starts off by saying her first job out of college was running HR for a truck stop. And I didn't know that about her. And wow, that is just, think about it, that is such a different type of HR job than being the chief people officer at a technology company. But some wonderful lessons that you get out of that.
That's a fair point, and that's pretty cool. So, in your so when you say Bolster, right? So Bolster talks about this on-demand leadership. I think I want to spend a few minutes on this. It's a pretty fascinating concept, right? So when you talk about leadership, you always envision someone who is right who's a cultural fit, who is part of the organization. They can they understand what we represent and moving forward. And then you talk about this idea of on-demand leadership. I'm curious, like how do you evaluate something like Bolster considering your past life?
How do I evaluate it?
Yeah. So how do you see this idea of on-demand leadership?
Sort of how does that type of talent fit into the life of the startup?
That's good.
Yeah, I mean it fits in several types of ways. So there are a few things that a few different types of work that we place at Bolster. We place independent board members, and I think that's a pretty discrete bucket. We place interim executives, fractional executives, and then we place coaches and mentors. And all those things have different use cases that fit in the life of a startup in different ways. So an interim executive is a pretty obvious one, right? You have a full-time person doing a job, that person is no longer there abruptly, right? Either they're on parental leave for 3 months and you just don't have backup. You have no one to cover it. Or they left abruptly, either because you exited them or they exited you abruptly and you have no backup. So interim, is pretty clear. And interim executives can be at big companies or small companies. Fractional executives are interesting. And this is one of those things that I think is relatively new over the last 5 to 10 years that's sort of coming on strong as the gig economy continues to move up market. And the concept of a fractional executive is they are your senior executive. They just don't work full time. And if you think about an early stage company, even think about a 50 or 100 person company, having a very senior C-level executive in every different chair around the executive table, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 chairs, that's really expensive. That's a heavy team. So you may not want that. You may not need that. You may not be able to afford that. But having someone, whether it's a couple days a week or a few days a month, who really is that senior, been there, done that, seasoned executive, provide a level of strategic guidance and oversight to a more junior operating team might be a much better way to think about scaling your startup than going without a senior person or going with a full-time, very expensive senior person. And that can work in any function, right? We place startup fractional CTOs, fractional heads of sales, a lot of fractional CFOs and heads of marketing. So it could be any function where having that person a couple days a week is the right fit for an organization. And then finally, mentors and coaches are a very important part of the startup ecosystem. And we define those two things pretty differently. So a coach we think of as someone who's working with you on your development plan, right? Someone who's helping you be the best version of you, right? Helping you learn how to be a leader. And someone who's a great coach can coach lots of different people across all functions. A a mentor is someone that knows your job, knows the craft of your job, and can teach you how to do the craft of your job. So, a mentor for a CMO or for a director of marketing is really different than a mentor for a VP of finance. It's a practitioner in that field that's just going to be your sounding board or your go-to person to advise you on the craft of your job. So we place a lot of mentors as well. So if you think about it now from the perspective of a startup CEO, right? You're building and running a startup, and you care about scaling your team and yourself and your board. All of those different things that we place fall into that framework somewhere. So scaling your team, do you have the right people in place? Would you benefit from a fractional executive? Do you need an interim executive? Does someone need a functional mentor? Right? Scaling yourself as a CEO, do you need a more experienced CEO as a mentor, or do you need a coach? And then finally, scaling your board is adding independent directors to boards that are typically dominated by founders and VCs to make sure that you get some outside perspective on the board.
And so you are a technology company, right? So you bring technology to this mix. So I'm curious to understand what role technology play when it comes to um, getting me leadership access or leaders access. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, we're building an online marketplace that's driven by data. The same way you go into Airbnb and you set a whole bunch of filters that what are you looking for? Where do you want to go? How many days? How many people are you going to have there? Are you bringing pets? Do you need a pool? Right. And then up pops the map with all the relevant places on it. That's the Bolster experience as well. So if you're looking for a mentor for your VP of finance and you're a B2B e-commerce company, and you're located in New York and you want someone who's available a couple hours a month and you want someone that's worked at the, $10 to $25 million stage, put all those filters in and we will direct you to a bunch of people that are qualified to do that work.
So if you wear your Bolster hat and you have technology in your favor, you are helping connect leadership with organizations, their vacancy or the opportunity in them. From your vantage point, what do you see as the future of leadership? Like, do you see future where leaders are fragmented and mapped using these capabilities, which are fascinating, which exactly fill for the void that's missing and give them quick access to the most agonizing pain, or it's 17 years brewing relationship building um, leadership? So what's your take on that?
I think it's a hybrid. The most successful management teams are also the ones that have a very cohesive culture, that do have a good mix of outside experience and tenure. You obviously need people who know the business well, who know the customers well, who know the people well. So I don't think you could staff a leadership team indefinitely with fractionals and with mentors. But what we do, and the reason the company is called Bolster, is we are there to help bolster your team. And your team, your board, yourself, it's never going to be exactly what you want and exactly what you need if all you're focused on is full-time people in seats. I think the work that we're doing already with a number of our clients is sort of proving that out, that the margin of excellence for a management team can come from being bolstered by some fractionals or coaches or mentors or a great board member.
I think it's a fascinating idea. So definitely, thank you for doing your part on that. So now let's get on a slightly fun ground. So we and by the way, thank you so much for walking us through your journey and helping us understand startup CXO. So we call this section rapid fire. And
Okay.
what do we do is so I'll usher a keyword or whatever it is, and just tell me what comes to your mind, and then you can elaborate more if things needs more elaboration, but that's how how the rapid fire works. So should we start?
Okay. Let's go.
So startups.
Driving this country's economic engine.
Entrepreneurship.
Sport.
Failures.
Learning.
Hmm. Growth.
Painful.
That's interesting. Culture.
Everything.
Founder.
Fun.
Disruption.
More fun.
Interesting. Jobs of future.
Flexible.
That's interesting. Future of startups.
Crowdfunded.
And future of organizations.
Back in an office? Question mark.
Yeah, that's a big question mark. So thank you for playing that. I do appreciate that. So now we're at the tail end of the conversation, and I want to spend few minutes um, understanding your personal journey to where you are today. So basically, we ask all of our guests to talk and share about um, some qualities that has helped them become what they have become. They have contributed to their success. Talk to us about some of those qualities that has shaped you what you are today.
Um, I think one is that I have been very intentional about scaling myself as a leader over the years. I'm very proud of the fact that I founded a company and ran it till it was north of 100 million in revenue.
Mm.
Um, but there's not one thing that goes into that, right? It's putting all sorts of support systems in place, and then it's changing those as you need to change them. It's working with a coach. It's working with mentors. It's working with a peer group. It's having a phenomenal executive assistant and learning how to really optimize that relationship. Uh, so I feel like I've been very lucky to have all of those great people around me, but very intentional about seeking them out. I think a second thing is that I've come to believe over the years, and this is a little bit of a complicated sentence that I say a lot, but it's that luck is more important than timing,
Mm.
which is more important than execution, which is more important than the idea. So we talked earlier about how like the idea is great, but if you don't have a team to execute it, it kind of doesn't matter. But we didn't really talk about the role of timing and the role of luck. And I think in business and probably in life, those things are so important. And just think about Facebook was not the first social network,
Mm.
right? There was Friendster, there was MySpace, there were a bunch of things, right? LinkedIn was not the first thing like LinkedIn. There was Plaxo, if you remember that. And those things were not, maybe they weren't executed well. We know the idea was good because the idea took off eventually. My memory of them is that they were executed at least passably well, but it wasn't the right time for the world. Or maybe those founders didn't have the right luck. They didn't get them in the right hands at the right time, or they didn't have the right investors or something. And I think as an entrepreneur, and an operator, I've always tried to be really thoughtful and mindful about timing and luck. And you can't create those things, but you can be mindful about them, and you can try to put yourself in the best position to take advantage of trends, right, of timing. And there's that old expression about luck that fortune favors the bold, right? Or you have to shoot to score, right? So you can kind of make your own luck if you're persistent enough.
That's a fair point. So we ask all of our guests to share some of their favorite reads. So I wonder if you have any read that has inspired you, or is in your list of good read to follow.
I'll tell you two of my favorite business related books. One is Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which possible that's actually my favorite business book. It's certainly a phenomenal one. And being a CEO or a founder, your job is full of hard things, and it's a book that really resonates with founders. it's very different from my book, and I like to think the two of them go well together. The other book of all the business books that I've read that I turn to the most is a book called The Advantage by Patrick Lencioni. And I'm a big Lencioni fan. I've read all of his books. But The Advantage is one where he pulls in the frameworks from lots of his other books all into that one book. So I sort of describe The Advantage as a little bit of like how to run your leadership team. And I think it's a really, really accessible and useful book.
Interesting. No, that's fascinating, and thank you for sharing that. So now, as the last but not the least, so if you want something that our listeners and viewers to take away from this conversation, like what would that be? What would be your closing thought?
My closing thought is that it's about scaling. And I would say most people, whether it's you, CEO, or someone on your team, most people can't scale infinitely, but they can scale a lot further than you think. And that what I've learned over the years is that the key to scaling is about being obsessed with mastering the craft of your job. Not just obsessed about knocking down things off your task list. Not just obsessed about doing a good job here or a good job there. It's about mastering the craft of your job.
With that, thank you so much, Matt, for spending time with us, helping us understand um, the startup CXO landscape, and thank you for playing your part in educating entrepreneurs that are building, as you rightly said, tomorrow's the future. And thank you for all you are doing, and thank you for this amazing book. I think it's definitely, I agree, it's a field guide, and it is and to a nerdy entrepreneur, this is an amazing paperweight also. It's heavy, it's a good exercise, 10 times a day. You learn something, and probably you build a muscle or two. So I think from that point of view, it's amazing, and thank you for that.
Thanks, Vishal. I appreciate you having me on.
Awesome. Take it. Thank you.